My name is Garrett Lindquist. I'm 44 years old, and 13 months ago, a federal prosecutor read my wife's name into the record while the man who destroyed her sat 6 feet away from me. They spent 9 years painting over poison in the walls of a school where 600 kids went to class every day. My wife, Rhea, taught science in that building for 13 years. When she started asking questions about the ceiling tiles turning black, they didn't fix the problem. They fixed her. She lost her job, then her health, then her name. I'm a commercial pilot, not a lawyer, not a journalist. But for 22 months, I built a federal case against the Pella East School District that ended with a 7-count indictment. The superintendent who made it all disappear, a man this town practically worshipped, sat in that conference room and watched his career end. And the thing that scares me even now is that half the town isn't sure I did the right thing. Before the indictment, before the federal investigators, before any of it, there was a Tuesday morning in September when I stood in our kitchen and Rhea couldn't take a full breath without coughing. That's where this really started. If this story stays with you, and I think parts of it will, especially what Vernon Cladstrup said to my wife's face in front of the school board, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You're going to want to hear what happened at that courthouse. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I always read those. Let me take you back to the fall of 2016. Pella, Iowa. Population just over 10,000. Pella's the kind of place where you wave at people from your car and they wave back even if they don't know who you are. Dutch heritage everywhere. The Tulip Festival, the windmills, the brick storefronts on Franklin Street. Clean, orderly. Rhea and I moved there in 2004, the year she got hired at Pella East Middle School. She taught 8th grade physical science. She was the kind of teacher who stayed until 5:30 building things for the robotics club. Kids would come back after they graduated just to say hi to Mrs. Lindquist. She had this way of making a 13-year-old believe they could actually understand how the world worked. I used to tease her that her students liked her more than I did. We had a good life there. Small house on Elm Drive, 3 blocks from the school. I'd fly 3 or 4 days a week, come home, mow the lawn, cook dinner while she graded papers at the kitchen table. We had a cat named Biscuit who slept on the back of the couch. Normal. Boring, even. The kind of boring you don't appreciate until it's gone. Our neighbor across the street was a retired postal worker named Dale Reebkis. He'd been in Pella his whole life. Good guy. Brought us zucchini from his garden every August whether we wanted it or not. The school was old. Built in 1971. Flat roof, brown brick, those narrow windows that never opened all the way. The district had been promising a major renovation for years. It was always next budget cycle. Everyone knew the building needed work. And honestly, most people in town figured it was just a budget thing. Schools are always underfunded. Things don't get fixed. You deal with it. What nobody knew, or what everybody pretended not to know, was that the building was making people sick. Rhea first mentioned the ceiling tiles in October 2016. Casual, the way you mention a dripping faucet. She said, "The tiles above my lab are turning dark again. I put in another work order." She'd been putting in work orders since 2014. At least 9 of them over 2 years. The maintenance response was always the same. Someone would come, look at the tiles, and either replace one or paint over it with that thick white sealant. The dark spots would come back in a few months. Rhea mentioned it to other teachers. A couple of them had noticed similar stains in their rooms. The art teacher, one hallway over, said she'd had headaches every afternoon since August. I didn't think much of it then. Old building. Iowa humidity. Flat roof from the 70s. Things get damp. The district was stretched thin. One custodian for the whole building. Maintenance requests that took weeks to process. You don't assume conspiracy. You assume the system is slow. But by January 2017, Rhea started coughing. Not a cold cough. A deep, dry cough that would hit her in the middle of the night. She'd wake up gasping, and I'd lie there listening to her trying to get her breathing under control. And then she'd pad down the hall to the kitchen and sit with a glass of water until it stopped. She went to our family doctor in February. He said it was probably seasonal, gave her an inhaler, told her to watch it. She'd never had asthma before, never had breathing problems of any kind. She kept teaching. She kept putting in work orders. She kept getting the same response. In March 2017, she did something that, looking back, sealed her fate. She cut a small piece off one of the discolored ceiling tiles in her lab and sealed it in a plastic bag. She brought it home and showed me. It was soft, almost crumbly, and the underside was covered in dark, greenish-black growth. She held it under the kitchen light and turned it over slowly, like she was studying a specimen in her own classroom. "That's mold," she said. "That's definitely mold." She brought it to the principal's office the next morning. His name was Darren Calloway. He looked at the sample, held it at arm's length like it might bite him, told her he'd send it to the superintendent's office, and asked her not to share it with other staff. "Let's not cause a panic over a ceiling tile," he said. A ceiling tile. That's how he framed it. One tile. Like she was overreacting about a water stain. Like the 13-year veteran science teacher who'd taught her students about biological contamination couldn't identify mold growing 2 feet above her head. What Rhea didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that 2 weeks later, Superintendent Vernon Cladstrup held a closed meeting with the school board president and the district facilities director. The subject of that meeting was the mold contamination at Pella East Middle School. I eventually obtained the minutes of that meeting through a federal subpoena. They knew. March 2017. They had an independent assessment on their desk that said the contamination was in the HVAC system, the ceiling cavity, and at least 4 interior walls. The estimated remediation cost was $1.8 million. The district was 8 months away from a public vote on a $12 million renovation bond. If the mold story went public before that vote, the bond would fail. Parents would pull kids. State inspectors would show up. The renovation, Vernon's legacy project, the thing he'd been building toward for his entire career, would collapse. So they made a decision. They painted over it. Literally. They hired a crew to come in over spring break and apply antimicrobial sealant to every affected surface. Not remediation, cosmetic concealment. And Rhea kept breathing that air for 2 more years. By the fall of 2017, Rhea was seeing a pulmonologist in Des Moines. Her breathing had gotten worse. She was using the inhaler 3 or 4 times a day, and some evenings she'd come home and just sit on the edge of the bed for 10 minutes, not talking, just trying to settle her lungs. The doctor ran tests and found elevated markers consistent with chronic environmental exposure, his words. He asked her if she worked in a building with water damage. She told him about the tiles. He told her to document everything. That's when she started writing things down. Dates of work orders, photos of the stains, names of teachers who'd reported similar symptoms. She put it all in a binder she kept at home. She'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner with her laptop and her phone, cross-referencing dates and uploading pictures, and I'd watch her from across the room and think, she's building a case. She doesn't know it yet, but that's what this is. Now here's the thing, and this is where I need to stop for a second. That moment when Rhea started documenting, when she shifted from concerned teacher to someone building a record. I've thought about it 100 times since. Have you ever watched someone you love realize that the people in charge aren't just dropping the ball? That they're actually choosing not to catch it? That shift, from trusting the system to understanding the system doesn't want to be trusted, it changes a person. If you've been through something like that, I'd like to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Because what's about to happen to Rhea at that school board meeting is something that changes the entire direction of this story. By December 2017, Rhea had documented 23 work orders submitted by teachers across the building, not just hers. She requested a formal indoor air quality assessment through the district. The request went to Vernon Cladstrup's office. He denied it, in writing. His response said, and I still remember the phrasing because it burned into my brain, "Current facility conditions do not warrant independent environmental assessment. The district's maintenance protocols are sufficient to address cosmetic moisture concerns." Cosmetic moisture concerns. My wife was on a nebulizer by then. A nebulizer. She was 41 years old and she'd never smoked a cigarette in her life. In January 2018, Rhea went to a school board meeting. Open session. She spent the whole weekend before organizing her presentation. She color-coded tabs in her binder. She rehearsed what she was going to say in the bathroom mirror. I could hear her through the door, going over the numbers, keeping her voice even. She was so prepared. She genuinely believed that if she just presented the evidence clearly, the board would have to act. That's who Ria is. She trusts evidence. She trusts the process. She stood at the podium with her binder and asked the board to approve an independent mold assessment of Pella East. She was calm. She was professional. She cited her documentation, the work orders, the teacher's health complaints. I sat in the third row. I could see the back of her neck, the way she held the binder against her stomach with both hands like it was a shield. The room was about half full, maybe 40 community members, some teachers, a few parents. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone's phone buzzed and they fumbled to silence it. Vernon Cladstrup sat at the head of the table. He let her finish. He didn't interrupt once. He had this look on his face, patient, almost sympathetic, like a principal listening to a student explain why their homework was late. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, and this was in front of the entire board and about 40 community members, "Mrs. Lindquist, I appreciate your concern for the building, but I think we need to be careful about making health claims without medical expertise. You're a science teacher, not an environmental scientist. Let's let the professionals handle facility management." That's when I saw it. The way 3 board members looked down at the table. One of them, a younger guy, maybe mid-30s, in a plaid shirt, glanced at Ria and then quickly away, like he was ashamed but didn't want anyone to notice. The woman next to him shuffled her papers, deliberately, the way you do when you want to look busy so nobody asks you a question. The room went quiet. Not surprised quiet, complicit quiet. They already knew. I gripped the armrest of my folding chair so hard the metal edge cut into my palm. Ria stood at that podium for another 3 seconds. She closed her binder. She said, "Thank you for your time." Her voice didn't crack. She walked back to her seat next to me and sat down and looked straight ahead. The art teacher, the one with the headaches, was sitting 2 rows behind us. As Ria passed, she leaned forward and whispered, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Why isn't anyone listening to her?" Nobody answered. We walked to the parking lot without speaking. The January air hit us and Ria coughed, that dry, deep cough, and I waited until it passed. She got in, closed the door. She said, "He already had his answer before I opened my mouth." I started the car. I didn't say anything because she was right, and I didn't know what to do with that yet. After the board meeting, things moved fast. Ria filed a formal complaint with the Iowa Department of Education in February 2018. She submitted her binder, 31 pages of documentation. 2 weeks later, Vernon called her into his office. He told her that her performance reviews for the past year had shown concerns, and that he was placing her on an improvement plan. 13 years of excellent evaluations, not one disciplinary note. And suddenly, she needed an improvement plan. She kept pushing. She went to the local paper, the Pella Chronicle. She talked to a reporter named Bridget Sato. Bridget wrote a piece about teacher concerns regarding building conditions. It was careful, measured, didn't name Vernon directly, but it was enough. Ria had hope after the article. She came home the day it ran lighter than I'd seen her in months. 3 parents had emailed her. A teacher from the elementary school had texted saying, "We support you." She thought the attention might protect her, that the district wouldn't dare escalate if people were watching. Within a week, the district issued a public statement. The statement said that all maintenance concerns at Pella East had been thoroughly addressed through routine facility protocols, and that unverified claims circulating in the media do not reflect the district's commitment to student and staff safety. Unverified claims. Ria had documentation going back to 2014. Then the isolation started. Teachers she'd worked with for years stopped eating lunch with her. The principal started scheduling her classes in different rooms, away from the wing where the worst contamination was, sure, but also away from the other teachers. She told me she'd walk into the staff lounge and conversations would stop. One morning she arrived early and found that someone had removed her nameplate from her mailbox in the office. It was back by lunch. Nobody mentioned it. "It's not that they're angry at me," she said one night. "They're scared. They're scared that if they stand with me, the same thing happens to them." She was right. That's exactly what was happening. Then came the encounter I wasn't expecting. I ran into Vernon at the Hy-Vee on a Saturday in April. He was in the produce section with his wife, picking through the tomatoes. He saw me, and instead of looking away, he walked over. Friendly, relaxed. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Garrett, I want you to know I take Ria's health concerns very seriously. I really do. But I think we both know that the district can't be held responsible every time an employee decides their building is making them sick. I just hope she's getting the help she needs, and I don't mean from a lawyer." He said it with a concerned smile, like he was doing me a favor, like he was warning a friend. I stood there with a bag of onions in my hand, and I couldn't speak. Not because I was scared, because I understood, in that exact moment, that this man didn't just disagree with Ria. He had already decided what she was. He had already written the story where she was the problem. By May 2018, the improvement plan had become a formal reprimand. By September 2018, Ria was called into an HR meeting and told that her position was being restructured due to declining enrollment projections. Her contract was not renewed. She was out. 13 years, the robotics club she'd built from scratch, the kids who still emailed her, gone. And Vernon Cladstrup stood at the podium at the next school board meeting and talked about difficult staffing decisions and the district's commitment to fiscal responsibility. He never said her name. The bond vote passed that November, $12 million. Vernon got a standing ovation at the announcement. That night, Ria sat on the couch with her nebulizer and watched the local news coverage of the bond celebration. She didn't say anything, but she pulled her binder off the shelf and set it on the kitchen table. She left it there. When I turned the lights off to go to bed, it was still sitting in the middle of the table like it was waiting for something. After Ria lost her job, she kind of retreated. She spent most of the winter on the couch. The cough was constant by then. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning, hacking so hard that Biscuit would jump off the bed. I'd sit with her in the bathroom with the shower running hot, steam filling the room, waiting for her lungs to calm down. Sometimes she'd lean against me, and I'd feel her ribs moving under my hand, and I'd think, this is the woman who organized a county-wide robotics tournament. This is the woman who once drove 45 minutes in a snowstorm to deliver a recommendation letter to a student's house because the kid didn't have email, and she can't breathe. She applied for teaching positions in other districts. 2 interviews. Both times, when they called Pella East for a reference, the conversations ended fast. I don't have proof of what Vernon's office said to those schools, but Ria never got a call back. In March 2019, she was hospitalized. 4 days at Mercy One in Des Moines. The pulmonologist ran a full workup. The diagnosis was chronic hypersensitivity pneumonitis, environmental lung disease, caused by prolonged exposure to organic particulates, mold. The doctor sat us down in her office and said, "This is consistent with years of exposure to aspergillus in an enclosed space. Your lungs have permanent scarring." Permanent. I sat in that chair and I felt something deeper than anger. The kind of thing where your hands go still and your mind goes very, very clear. I looked at Ria and she was nodding. Nodding like the doctor was telling her something she already knew. Like her body had been saying it for months and her brain was just now catching up. That night, I drove home alone while Ria stayed in the hospital. I sat in our kitchen at the table where she used to grade papers. Her binder was on the shelf in the hallway closet. I sat there for probably an hour. Didn't eat. Poured a glass of whiskey and set it on the table and didn't drink it. Biscuit jumped up on the chair next to me and I scratched his ears, and I thought about the life we were supposed to have. We'd been talking about maybe adopting. We'd gone to an informational meeting at an agency in Des Moines the year before. Ria wanted to travel when she retired. She had a list of national parks she wanted to visit, written on a sticky note on the fridge. The sticky note was still there. I called my brother in Cedar Falls. I said, "She has permanent lung damage." He was quiet for a long time and then he said, "Garrett, don't do anything stupid. Just take care of Ria. Let the lawyers handle the rest." I said, "What lawyers?" He said, "You'll find lawyers." He meant well. He meant, "This isn't your fight. Let someone else carry it." I sat there after I hung up. I was afraid. Afraid that going after a superintendent and a school board in a town of 10,000 people would cost us whatever we had left. The house, the neighbors, the quiet life that was already half gone. And afraid of something worse, that I'd been too slow. That if I'd paid attention 2 years earlier, when Rhea first brought that tile home, maybe her lungs would still work. I pulled the binder off the shelf. I read every page. Somewhere in the middle, I found a note Rhea had written in the margin next to a work order from November 2016. Heard from Jenny at West. Same tiles, same stains. Ask maintenance. She'd circled it twice. I didn't know who Jenny was. I didn't think much of it then. And I decided, I'm not a detective. I'm not a lawyer. I fly planes for a living. But I know how to follow procedures. I know how to check systems. I know how to document a problem methodically, step by step, until the evidence speaks for itself. I can fly a regional jet through instrument approaches in zero visibility. I can navigate thunderstorms, wind shear, icing conditions. I have checklists for everything. And I could not figure out how to get a school district to fix a ceiling. That's the joke. A ceiling. 2 phone calls and a work order. That's all it would have taken. But it took a federal prosecutor instead. The next morning, I called the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. I explained my wife's situation. They transferred me 3 times. On the 4th call, I reached a woman in the Environmental Health Division. She listened for 40 minutes. At the end, she said, "Have you contacted the EPA?" I hadn't, but I did that afternoon. That was April 3rd, 2019. I know the date because I wrote it in a notebook I started that day. A composition notebook, the black and white kind. Page 1. EPA Region 7, Kansas City Office. Spoke with intake coordinator. Case reference pending. The investigation had started. Nobody in Pella knew. For the next 14 months, I lived 2 lives. Monday through Thursday, I was Garrett the pilot. I flew my routes, did my overnights in Omaha or Minneapolis, came home and mowed the lawn. Friday through Sunday, I was someone else. I gathered everything. Rhea's binder was the foundation. I added to it. FOIA ed the district's facility inspection records. Requested maintenance logs from the county. Tracked down the contractor who'd done the spring break sealant job in 2017. His name was Orrin Hecht. He ran a small operation out of Knoxville. I need to tell you about Orrin because he's the reason I almost went down the wrong road. For about 3 months, I was convinced Orrin was the key to the whole thing. His crew did the sealant application over spring break 2017. They didn't do remediation, just sealant. I pulled the county contractor registration and found that Orrin's license had been under review for an unrelated commercial job. A warehouse in Marion where the client complained about incomplete moisture treatment. To me, that looked like a pattern. I spent weekends building a timeline of his crew's work against the contaminated area. The numbers didn't add up. The crew had treated about 40% of the affected area. I drove past his shop in Knoxville twice, working up the nerve to confront him. I was wrong about all of it. When I finally reached him, it took 4 calls and a drive to his shop. He told me something that turned the whole thing around. "Mr. Lindqvist," he said, "I wrote that district a letter in April 2017 telling them the sealant would not address the underlying contamination. I told them they needed full remediation. I've got the letter on file." He showed me the letter. Certified mail. Received and signed by the facilities director at Pella East Community School District. Orrin wasn't the villain. He'd flagged the problem. He'd told them, in writing, on company letterhead, that what they were doing was insufficient and potentially dangerous. The district had ignored him and hired a different crew to do the cosmetic work. That letter was a turning point. It meant the district had been explicitly warned by a licensed contractor, in writing, and proceeded anyway. That's not negligence. That's a choice. And that's where I want to pause. Because this is the moment I had to make a decision that I'm still thinking about. I had that letter in my hand. Certified mail. Proof that they knew. If I took it to the feds, it would end Vernon's career. It would end the careers of the board members who approved the cover-up. It would split this town in half. I knew all of that standing in Orrin's shop. If you had that letter, proof that the people in charge knowingly let your wife breathe poison, would you take it to the feds, knowing what it would do to your community? Or would you try to handle it quietly? I still don't know if there was a right answer. Tell me what you think in the comments. The EPA assigned an investigator. I met with her twice in Des Moines. I provided everything: Ria's binder, the FOIA records, Oren's letter, the maintenance logs. She told me she'd worked environmental cases for 11 years, and the documentation I'd assembled was prosecutable. In January 2020, the EPA referred the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Iowa. A federal prosecutor named Harlan Oakes took it on. I met Harlan in a conference room in Des Moines. He was maybe 55. Gray suit, reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. He looked at my composition notebooks, 3 of them by then, and said, "You did this yourself?" I told him I fly planes. He said, "Apparently you do more than that." That conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, Harlan told me there was enough for a grand jury. But he wanted one more thing: physical evidence from inside the building. That's where Cosimo came in. Cosimo Bautista was the head custodian at Pella East. He'd worked there for 19 years. Quiet guy. Born in the Philippines, moved to Iowa in his 20s. He kept the building running: boiler, plumbing, electrical, all of it. When the sealant crew came in during spring break 2017, Cosimo was there. He saw what they did. He saw the work orders that were filed and the ones that weren't. And he did something that nobody knew about. He kept copies. Every work order related to moisture or ceiling damage. Every maintenance request that went unanswered. He'd photocopy them on the school's ancient Xerox machine after hours and take the copies home. He also kept 3 of the original contaminated ceiling tiles that were removed during the sealant job. He put them in sealed freezer bags and stored them in a plastic bin in his garage. I didn't know any of this. I found out because Cosimo's wife called me. Here's how that happened. Bridget Sotto's article from April 2018 had mentioned my name. Just once, in passing. Ria Lindquist's husband Garrett confirmed that his wife had been documenting building conditions for over 2 years. Most people forgot that article by the following week, but Cosimo didn't. He clipped it from the paper and put it in the folder with the work orders. And then, in early 2020, word got around the school that someone had been filing FOIA requests about maintenance records. Cosimo heard it from a colleague in the front office. He put 2 and 2 together. In February 2020, a month after I'd met with the federal prosecutor, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as Cosimo's wife. She said, "My husband wants to talk to you about the school. He says you should come to our house." I drove there on a Saturday afternoon. Their house was on the east side of Pella, a small ranch with a chain-link fence and a vegetable garden in the back. Cosimo met me at the door. He barely spoke. He led me to the garage and opened the plastic bin. 3 ceiling tiles in sealed bags. A folder with about 60 pages of copied work orders, some with handwritten notes. One page had a yellow sticky note that said, "Told supervisor 3 times, no response." I stood in that man's garage and I could have cried. All those months of building the case from the outside, and here was someone who'd been building it from the inside since 2017. He never told a soul. He was afraid of losing his job, but he couldn't bring himself to throw the evidence away. "Mrs. Lindquist was a good teacher," he said. That was all he said about why. Hit subscribe now if you haven't, because the evidence in Cosimo's garage is the reason Vernon Cladstrup is facing federal charges today. His wife brought us coffee in the garage. She set the mugs on the workbench and put her hand on Cosimo's shoulder for a moment, and he reached up and covered her hand with his, and then she went back inside. Nobody said anything about it. There was nothing to say. I connected Cosimo with Harlan Oakes. The ceiling tiles were tested by the EPA lab in Kansas City. Aspergillus and Stachybotrys, black mold, at levels described in the report as significantly exceeding safe occupational exposure thresholds. The grand jury convened in June 2020. Vernon Cladstrup was indicted on 7 counts, including conspiracy to conceal environmental hazards in a public building, obstruction of a federal investigation, and retaliation against a whistleblower. The news broke on a Wednesday. I was sitting in our kitchen when Ria called me from the living room. "Garrett, it's on the news." I walked in. There was Vernon's face on KCCI Des Moines, standing outside the Marion County Courthouse with his lawyer. The banner at the bottom said, "Pella School Superintendent indicted on federal charges." I sat down on the arm of the couch. Rhea reached over and took my hand. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Now you'd think that would be the end. The bad guy gets caught. The truth comes out. Roll credits. But that's not what happened. Within 48 hours of the indictment, Vernon Cladstrup's allies, and he had a lot of them, started a campaign that I wasn't prepared for. The school board president, Colleen Dykstra, held a press conference. She said the indictment was politically motivated, and that Vernon had always acted in the best interest of the district and its students. She called the charges a misunderstanding of standard facility management practices. A misunderstanding. But here's what hurt more. The community split. Not 50-50, more like 60-40 against me. Vernon had been superintendent for 16 years. He'd expanded the elementary school. He'd brought the district's test scores up. He'd secured the $12 million bond. People in Pella liked him. They liked their new renovation. And some of them, a lot of them, didn't want to believe that the man who'd built all of that had also poisoned their children's school. I came home one evening after a run to the post office and found a note taped to our mailbox. Block letters on lined paper. "You're destroying this town for your own grudge." I pulled it off and folded it and put it in my pocket. I didn't show Rhea. I put it in the composition notebook. Evidence. I need to stop here because I'm about to walk into the worst 3 months of my life, and I want to know, would you have kept going? Right now, the man has been indicted. The evidence is overwhelming, and half your town thinks you're the villain. Would you have the nerve to stay in that town and ride it out? Or would you have left? Drop your answer in the comments. Because I stayed, and I'm still not sure that was smart. Let me tell you what staying looked like. Letters to the editor in the Pella Chronicle. Anonymous. Calling me a disgruntled husband and accusing Rhea of fabricating her illness for a lawsuit. Then the tire. I walked out of the Hy-Vee on a Thursday evening. It was July, still light out, that long Iowa dusk, and my left rear tire was flat. Not low, flat. I crouched down and saw the slash. Clean, deliberate, a 4-inch cut along the sidewall. I stayed crouched there for a minute, just looking at it. I thought, someone stood in this parking lot, in broad daylight, and did this because I reported a crime. I called for a tow. I sat on the curb of the Hy-Vee parking lot waiting, and an old woman I didn't recognize walked past me and said, "Evening," and kept going. And that was the loneliest I've ever felt in my life. Dale Riebkes, my neighbor, the man who brought us zucchini every August, stopped waving when he drove past our house. The first time I noticed was a Monday morning. I was getting the mail. He was backing out of his driveway. I lifted my hand. He looked right at me and drove away. I stood there holding 2 envelopes and a furniture catalog, and I understood that 20 years of borrowing each other's lawnmowers and waving across the street could disappear in a week. That one was harder than the tire. I don't know why. Maybe because a stranger slashing your tire is rage, and that you can process. A friend looking through you is something else. But the worst was what happened with my job. In August 2020, I received a letter from the FAA's Aeromedical Certification Division. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint alleging that I had a substance abuse issue that rendered me unfit to hold a first-class medical certificate. Without that certificate, I can't fly. The complaint was baseless. I've never had a DUI. I've never failed a drug test. But the FAA is required to investigate every complaint. My certificate was placed under review. I was grounded for 11 weeks while they investigated. 11 weeks without pay. While the mortgage was due and Rhea's medical bills were arriving in thick envelopes, I sat at the kitchen table one night and calculated it. At our current burn rate, we had 9 weeks of savings left. I thought about this a lot during those weeks. How the people who knew about the mold and stayed silent weren't evil. Most of them, anyway. They were protecting the version of their town they needed to believe in. I never proved who filed the FAA complaint, but the timing was hard to call coincidental. Vernon's lawyer also filed a motion to dismiss the charges, arguing that the superintendent's decisions were within the scope of his administrative discretion. The motion was denied. The trial was set for March 2021, 7 months away. Then, everything broke open. The community pressure didn't let up. By October 2020, Rhea and I were going to the grocery store in Knoxville, 16 miles away, because the Pella Hy-Vee had become unbearable. People staring, conversations stopping. Once, a woman I didn't recognize approached me in the produce aisle and said, "I hope you're proud of what you did to this district." I didn't say anything. I just picked up my bag of apples and walked to the register. The cashier wouldn't look me in the eye. She scanned the items and said the total to the counter. I paid. I drove home. I told Rhea we should try the Knoxville store for a while. "How long is a while?" she asked. I didn't answer that. Then something happened that I didn't expect. The EPA investigation, which was ongoing parallel to the criminal case, expanded. In late October 2020, they tested the second middle school in the district, Pella West. Same HVAC system design, same vintage, same contractor for the original construction. I remember where I was when I found out. Harlan called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the kitchen table going through bills. He said, "Garrett, there's been a development with the EPA testing." I could hear something in his voice. Not excitement exactly, but the sound of a man who's been building a case and just watched another wall fall down. Pella West had mold too, not as severe as Pella East, but the same species, Aspergillus and Stachybotrys, the same pattern of painted-over contamination, the same work orders filed and ignored over a 5-year period. The EPA report concluded that the district's systemic failure to address environmental contamination affected both buildings. I sat at the kitchen table after Harlan hung up, and I put my head in my hands. Rhea had mentioned Pella West once, maybe a year and a half earlier. She'd said she'd heard from another teacher that the West building had the same ceiling problems. I'd told her it was probably just rumors. I'd said, "Let's focus on our case. Both buildings, not one teacher with a grudge. 2 schools, hundreds of kids." And Vernon Cladstrup had known about Pella West since 2018, a full year before my investigation even started. There were internal memos. He'd authorized the same sealant treatment at both buildings, the same decision, the same cover-up, twice. When that news broke in November 2020, the 60-40 split in town shifted. Not completely, but enough. Parents who'd been defending Vernon started showing up at school board meetings. Not angry exactly, scared. The questions they asked weren't about politics or lawsuits anymore. They were about their children. Was my kid in one of those classrooms? How long was my daughter breathing that air? I heard about the parent meetings from Bridget Sato. She told me that at one of them, a father stood up and said, "My son had respiratory infections 3 times in 5th grade. We took him to 3 different doctors. Nobody asked about the school. 3 infections, 3 doctors. Nobody asked." After the man sat down, the room was silent. A mother in the back row started crying. Not loud, just her shoulders shaking while she held her phone in her lap. Vernon resigned as superintendent in December 2020. No statement, no press conference. He just didn't show up one Monday. His office was cleared out by Tuesday afternoon. The board announced it as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Other opportunities. The man was under federal indictment. The trial started on a Monday in March 2021 at the federal courthouse in Des Moines. I remember the drive that first morning. 45 minutes on Highway 163, Rhea in the passenger seat with her portable oxygen concentrator humming in her bag. Neither of us talked. The radio was off. The sun was barely up. I parked in the garage across from the courthouse and we sat in the car for a few minutes after I turned the engine off. She reached over and straightened my collar. I hadn't noticed it was crooked. The courthouse lobby smelled like floor polish and old coffee. We went through security and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The gallery was about half full that first day. By day 3, it was standing room. I sat in the gallery every day for 8 days. The wooden bench was hard. My back ached by lunch. I kept a notebook on my knee, habit by then, but I barely wrote anything. I just watched. Vernon looked smaller in person. He wore a navy blazer that didn't fit him right in the shoulders. His lawyer made arguments about reasonable administrative decisions and the complexity of facility management in underfunded school districts. The defense's position was basically, the mold was a known issue, the district addressed it within budget constraints, and Ria's termination was unrelated. Harlan Oakes presented Cosimo's work orders, the EPA lab results, Orrin Hecht's letter, my composition notebooks, Ria's medical records, the internal memos from the 2017 meeting. On day 4, the district's former facilities director testified. He said Vernon had instructed him to prioritize visual correction over structural remediation on 3 separate occasions. When the defense attorney challenged his memory, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket, a printed email from Vernon dated April 2017 with the subject line, East Building Maintenance. The defense asked for a recess. On day 6, Vernon took the stand. He was composed, rehearsed. His answers were careful and administrative, the kind of language that sounds like cooperation but commits to nothing. But when Harlan asked him directly, "Did you have knowledge of the independent assessment recommending full mold remediation at Pella East Middle School in March 2017?" Something shifted. Vernon said, "I was aware of various maintenance assessments, yes. And did you authorize remediation as recommended? We addressed the issue through our standard maintenance protocols. You painted over it." Vernon's lawyer objected. The judge sustained it. But it didn't matter. The jury heard the question. Then Harlan asked, "Mr. Kladstrup, did you ever speak directly with Ria Lindquist about her health concerns?" Vernon paused. Longer than he'd paused for any other question. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and his eyes dropped to the table for a moment. Not to his notes, just to the blank surface of the table. Then he looked up and said, "I don't recall specific conversations. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. But I saw it. A crack. Not remorse, exactly. Something closer to the moment when you realize the story you've been telling yourself has stopped working. Then it was gone." He straightened his shoulders and went back to his careful answers. But the jury saw it too. The verdict came on March 19th, 2021. We waited in the gallery for 4 hours after the jury went out. I counted the ceiling tiles above me. Force of habit by then, I suppose. There were 68. Ria sat next to me with her hands folded in her lap, her breathing shallow and measured. I could hear the concentrator cycling through her bag. Guilty on 5 of 7 counts. Conspiracy, obstruction, whistleblower retaliation, environmental concealment, fraud related to the bond vote, because the district had represented the building as safe in the bond prospectus. He was acquitted on 2 lesser charges. I don't remember which ones. I was looking at Ria. She was sitting next to me. She didn't react when the verdict was read. No tears, no fist pump. She just sat there, very still, with her hands in her lap. And then she whispered, so quiet I barely caught it, "I just wanted them to fix the ceiling." That sentence. I can't tell you what that sentence did to me. After the courtroom cleared, I told Ria I needed a minute. She went to find Harlan to sign some paperwork. I walked down the hall to the men's room. It was empty. I stood at the sink and I held the edges of the counter and I looked at my face in the mirror and my hands were shaking. Not a little. Shaking like I couldn't control them. I ran the water cold and held my wrists under it and I started crying. Not the way you cry when you're sad. The way you cry when something heavy that's been sitting on your chest for 2 years finally shifts and you realize you've been holding your breath the entire time. I stood in that bathroom for probably 10 minutes. I dried my face with paper towels. I went back out and found Ria in the hallway, talking to Bridget Sato. She looked at me, and she knew. She didn't say anything. She just took my hand. We drove home. The sun was setting over the fields west of Pella. We didn't talk much. I kept both hands on the wheel and I thought, we won. We actually won. And Ria's lungs will never heal. Both of those things are true. Both of them are permanent. Vernon Kladstrup was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison. His state education license was permanently revoked. Colleen Dykstra resigned from the school board within 2 weeks of the verdict. The district settled with Rhea and 4 other former staff members for, I'm not going to say the amount. It's not the point. The State Department of Education launched an audit of environmental compliance protocols across every school district in Iowa. 72 districts were flagged for immediate inspection. The Pella East renovation was halted and redesigned. A full environmental remediation was completed by December 2021. The district's insurance premiums tripled. 2 other school board members who'd served during the cover-up quietly declined to run for re-election. I got my medical certificate reinstated in February 2021, before the trial. Full clearance. I was back in the cockpit by March. The FAA investigation found no basis for the anonymous complaint. 11 weeks of lost income for nothing. But that's a number on a ledger, and some numbers you just absorb. But here's the part that doesn't make it into the headlines. Rhea's lungs didn't get better. They won't get better. Chronic hypersensitivity pneumonitis doesn't reverse. The pulmonologist was clear about that from the beginning. Rhea can walk to the mailbox and back without getting winded on a good day. On a bad day, she uses a portable oxygen concentrator. She's 43. She can't teach anymore. The classroom air, any classroom, is a risk. She volunteers online now, tutoring middle school students in science through a nonprofit out of Cedar Rapids. It's not the same. She told me once that she misses the sound of lockers slamming in the hallway. I didn't know what to say to that. But my wife breathes through a machine. We still live in Pella. Some people ask me why. Honestly, I ask myself that too. But this is our house. This is where we built our life. I'm not going to let Vernon Cladstrup or anyone else decide where I live. It's different now, though. Dale Riebkes brought us zucchini again last August. First time in 2 years. He left it on the porch with a note that said, "From Dale." Didn't knock. I saw him walk away from the window. I think that was his apology. I don't know if I accepted it. I don't know what acceptance looks like for something like this. Maybe it looks like keeping the zucchini and making bread with it. So, that's what we did. Cosimo Bautista retired from the district in 2021. I saw him at the hardware store in November. He shook my hand and said, "How is she doing?" I told him. He nodded. Didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. Some nights I sit at the kitchen table after Rhea goes to bed, and I think about what we won. We won the case. The truth came out. Vernon is in prison. The schools got real remediation. Kids are breathing clean air now. If you've listened this far, and I know this one was a lot, I need to say something honest to you. Telling this story is the hardest thing I've done since sitting in that federal courtroom. Harder than building the case. Harder than the 11 weeks without pay. Because when you tell it out loud, you have to sit with all of it at once. The victory and the loss, right next to each other. Rhea asked me if I was sure I wanted to share this publicly. I told her I wasn't sure. But I think about the person out there right now, sitting in their kitchen at midnight, wondering if anyone's going to believe them. If this story reaches that person, then it's worth it. If this meant something to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I need the numbers, because the more people hear stories like this, the harder it gets for people like Vernon Cladstrup to paint over the truth and keep their jobs. Share it if you know someone fighting a system that's supposed to protect them. That's who this is for. I want to ask you something. Have you ever won something and still walked away carrying more weight than when you started? Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way, where the thing you fought for is real and true and right, but the damage is still there every morning when you wake up. If that's you, I'd want to hear about it. The comments are open. There are more stories like this coming. People who stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. Check the channel if you want to hear them. Some fights you win with your hands still shaking. Rhea told me the other day that she wants to learn to grow tulips. It's a Pella thing. She ordered bulbs from a catalog, 48 of them, red and yellow. She spent 20 minutes on the phone with the catalog company asking about bloom times and soil depth. I could hear her laughing at something the woman on the phone said. It was the first time in a while I'd heard her laugh about something that small. She can't kneel in the dirt for very long. So, I'm building her a raised bed. Cedar planks, waist high. She drew the dimensions on a napkin during breakfast. The napkin is on the fridge now, next to her old sticky note with the National Parks list. I went to the hardware store and bought the wood this morning. Loaded it into the truck bed myself. Drove home with the windows down. It's a Saturday. The sky is that flat white Iowa gets in early spring. I'm standing in the backyard with a tape measure and a level, and the neighbor's kid is riding his bike in circles on the sidewalk. Rhea is inside, watching from the kitchen window with a cup of coffee. I measure twice. I cut the first board.